Elizabeth Siders is the mother of 16 children. All 16 were removed from her home after they were found crammed into a filthy 12 by 12 room, malnourished, several unable to speak, 2 so medically deprived they had to be flown straight to trauma centers. She's been sitting in a Vinton County jail for almost 2 months now, and she wants out. But the prosecutor fighting to keep her there just filed something that changes the shape of this entire case.
According to her attorney, she's not a victim. So we'll let him decide how he wants to address his representation of her.
He says Elizabeth may soon face charges nobody outside that courtroom has heard about yet. He won't say what they are. He won't say when they're coming. He's only confirmed, in writing, that they're on the way, for a grand jury that, 7 weeks after her arrest, still hasn't even convened. That's the part of this case that doesn't add up yet, and it's the reason her own attorney has already asked a separate question in a separate filing, whether Elizabeth Siders belongs on the list of people who did this to those children, or on the list of people it was done to. That tension is the reason we're covering this one. Institutional accountability starts with asking who the system failed and who it protected, and this case has both questions running at the same time, unresolved, in the same courtroom. This is the fatal truth, and we follow cases through to the answer, not just to the arrest. So if that's what you're here for, stay with us on this one. Now, let's start with what's confirmed, because the confirmed facts alone are almost impossible to sit with. On June 30th, 2026, agents from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation and deputies from the Vinton County Sheriff's Office executed a search warrant at a home on Omer Street in the village of Hamden. The warrant had nothing to do with children. It was tied to a separate, ongoing investigation involving allegations of domestic abuse and neglect, and Gary Siders Jr. was separately wanted on a public indecency charge connected to that inquiry. Nobody walked into that house looking for what they found. Inside, deputies located 16 children, ranging in age from 1.5 to 18 years old, and 4 adults: Gary Siders Sr., 73, his wife Christina Siders, 67, their son Gary Siders Jr., 36, and Gary Jr.'s wife, 33-year-old Elizabeth Siders, the biological mother of all 16 children. All 4 were taken into custody. All 4 were charged with 16 counts of second-degree felony child endangering, a charge that under Ohio law specifically requires that the conduct caused serious physical harm to a child. Ohio Attorney General Andy Wilson stood in front of cameras days later and did not soften what his agents had seen. He called the scene inside that house pure evil, and said it ranked among the worst environments he had encountered in a career spent largely prosecuting exactly this kind of case. Vinton County Sheriff Ryan Kane, describing the room where most of the children had reportedly been confined for close to 4 years, said the space was contaminated with human and bacterial waste at a level he compared unfavorably to how the county's own livestock are kept. 7 of the 16 children required hospitalization. 2 were flown to trauma centers, and investigators said something that would end up shaping the entire pace of this case going forward. Several of the children could not communicate. Not wouldn't, couldn't. Officials described some as functionally nonverbal, others as unable to provide names, ages, or basic personal information, which meant the state initially had to file 17 counts instead of 16, simply because investigators couldn't yet confirm how many distinct children they were dealing with. Here's the first turn, and it's the one that took over the public conversation almost immediately. Elizabeth Siders was, by all visible accounts, treated differently from the moment of arrest. In booking video from June 30th, she is the only one of the 4 Siders family members not placed in handcuffs. Her body language in that footage reads as fundamentally different from her husband's and her in-laws. Shoulders rounded, hunched forward, what several observers described simply as looking scared. Paired with her age relative to the other 3 defendants, and with the fact that she had given birth to 18 children, including a set of conjoined twins who did not survive, over roughly 18 years, that image did something a probable cause affidavit alone couldn't have. It made people ask, immediately and out loud, whether Elizabeth Siders was actually the 4th defendant in this case, or something else entirely. Now, her attorney, J. Thomas Stawley was asked that question directly by a Columbus television station within days of the arrest. He said his client did not characterize herself as a victim, but he added, deliberately, that his office's own investigation into that possibility was still ongoing. Vinton County Prosecutor William Archer was asked the identical question at a press conference on July 8th. His answer was almost a non-answer.
According to her attorney, she's not a victim. So we'll let him decide how he wants to address his representation of her.
2 officials, 2 microphones, and neither one willing to close that door. That's the open loop this entire case has been running on since week 1, and it's worth sitting inside for a moment, because the answer to it changes everything about how the rest of this story should be read. To understand why that question is even on the table, you have to go back nearly 2 decades to a courthouse in Mason County, West Virginia, where a 15-year-old girl signed a marriage license with her parents' consent to marry an 18-year-old named Gary Siders Jr. 2 months later, she was pregnant with the first of what would become 16 living children. From that point forward, Elizabeth Siders gave birth roughly once a year for 18 consecutive years, 16 children total, including 3 additional sets of twins folded into that number, plus the conjoined twins born in 2022 who died shortly after birth. Every documented birth took place in a hospital. Gary Siders Jr. is listed as the father on each one. That detail matters more than it might seem to, because it means the state of Ohio had a complete, unbroken medical paper trail of this family's growth for 18 straight years, and no single agency connected that pattern to anything alarming until deputies executing an unrelated warrant walked through the front door in 2026. Before this goes further, it's worth pausing on how Elizabeth herself came across the one time the public actually got to see her speak, because it tells you something a press release can't. At her arraignment on July 1st, in front of Vinton County Common Pleas Judge Lena Featherolf Rogers, Elizabeth visibly struggled through the standard recitation of her rights. At one point, attempting to enter her own plea before the judge had finished explaining the process, she said only, "I want to plead not guilty," before the judge stopped her, reminding her of her right to remain silent, telling her directly this was not the moment to argue her case, and stating that if she was unsure how to proceed, the court would enter a not guilty plea on her behalf until she'd consulted counsel. It's a routine judicial caution. What made it notable here is what it seemed to reveal in the moment. A defendant who, according to observers watching the footage afterward, appeared to have something she wanted to say and no clear sense of how or when she was allowed to say it. That single courtroom moment is where the case's central, unresolved argument really lives, and it's the argument that a separate legal panel spent considerable time working through in the days after the arrest, asking the exact question Elizabeth's own booking photo had already raised for the public. If 4 adults lived in that house for years, and one of them was a teenage bride who never left the family's orbit afterward, was she the one setting the terms of that household, or was she absorbed into a dynamic that had already been established by the time she arrived at 15? It's not a rhetorical question, and it doesn't have an easy answer, because the honest version of this case has to hold 2 things at once. Elizabeth Siders is the biological mother of all 16 children, and she is also, by the account of nearly everyone who has looked closely at the timeline, the person who had the least power in that house for the longest period of time. Now, some of what's circulated online since the arrest tries to answer that question with more certainty than the record actually supports, and it's worth naming that clearly. An unverified Facebook post from a man identifying himself online as Elizabeth's brother alleges she was indoctrinated over nearly 2 decades and grew estranged from her birth family during that period. That post has not been authenticated, has not appeared in any court filing, and should be read as one relative's public reaction, not as evidence of coercion or control. Separately, online commentary comparing an older photo of Elizabeth to her booking photo, drawing conclusions about her emotional state purely from her eyes in each image, is speculation dressed up as analysis, and it belongs nowhere near an actual assessment of what happened inside that house. What is documented, and far more limited, is this. Elizabeth's mother maintained some contact over the years, including a 2020 Facebook birthday post, and one of Gary Jr.'s sisters appears, from public social media activity, to have had periodic contact with the household as well. How much either of them actually knew about conditions inside that house has not been established, and it remains one of the open threads investigators have not resolved in public. The community reaction on the ground told its own version of this story. Reporters who traveled to Hamden in the days after the arrest described a street with only 3 houses on it, spaced far apart, across from a set of railroad tracks. The kind of rural geography where a family could genuinely go unnoticed for years, not because neighbors didn't care, but because there was almost no one close enough to notice. One woman who lived a town over told a reporter that large families weren't unusual in that part of southern Ohio. 4 or 5 children, sure, but nothing close to 16. And in the days after the story broke, people reportedly began driving in from other counties just to see the house itself, some traveling well over an hour, turning a crime scene into something closer to a roadside landmark. Vinton County's prosecutor made a point, more than once, of telling the public that this family wasn't originally from the county and that what happened on Omer Street didn't reflect local values. A claim from the state about the community's character, not an independently verified fact, but a telling one about how badly the county wanted this story kept separate from its own identity. Here's a question worth sitting with before this moves into the legal fight that's happening right now. Given everything you've heard so far, the age she married at, the annual pregnancies for 18 years, the fact that she was the only one of the 4 not handcuffed at booking, do you think Elizabeth Siders had the power to stop what was happening in that house? One word, yes or no. Drop it in the comments, because the next part of this story is the part where the state of Ohio, in writing, gave its own answer to that exact question, and it isn't the answer you might expect. So here's where that answer starts. Elizabeth Siders has now been in custody for close to 2 months. Her attorney filed a motion in early July asking the court to modify her $300,000 bond to a recognizance release, meaning she could leave jail without paying cash, so long as she agreed to conditions like a GPS ankle monitor. Stolle argued publicly that his client posed no danger and simply didn't have the money to post bail as it stood, telling a Columbus station that in his interactions with her, she was exhausted, kept asking about her children, and wanted to understand what evidence the state actually had against her. For over a month, the court did not rule on that request. Then, on August 17th, prosecutor William Archer filed a memorandum formally opposing any bond modification for Elizabeth Siders. And it's worth going through what that filing actually said, because it's the single most revealing document to come out of this case since the arrests themselves. Archer wrote that the court should deny the modification for 3 specific reasons. First, that Elizabeth is facing multiple serious pending charges, the 16 second-degree felony counts, each carrying a statutory maximum of up to 8 years, and is, in Archer's words, a flight risk and a potential risk to the victims in this case. Second, that Elizabeth had filed her own motion requesting a competency evaluation, and that until her competency is formally determined, she is, in the state's framing, at personal risk. And third, the line that reframes the entire case, that Elizabeth Siders has new, serious felony charges that will be considered by a grand jury. Archer did not specify what those charges are. They do not currently appear anywhere in the public court record, but the implication is unmistakable. Whatever the state is preparing to present, it goes beyond the 16 child endangering counts the public already knows about. That detail alone is enough to stop and sit with, because a prosecutor doesn't put undisclosed future charges into a bond memo unless he wants the court, and by extension the public, to understand that this case is bigger than what's currently on paper. It also complicates the victim question rather than resolving it, because a defendant facing new, unspecified felony charges doesn't sound like a defendant the state views as a bystander swept up in her husband's household. And yet, in the very same window, Elizabeth's own legal team filed something that pulls in the opposite direction entirely. A formal motion, filed August 4th, requesting both a competency evaluation to determine whether she's fit to stand trial, and, separately, contingent on a finding of competency, an evaluation to determine whether she could be found not guilty by reason of insanity for conduct alleged to have occurred while she may have been suffering from a significant, undisclosed mental health condition. Judge Featherolf Rogers granted that request on August 11th. Elizabeth Siders is now the fourth and final member of the Siders family to have a competency evaluation ordered. Her husband, her father-in-law, and her mother-in-law had each already sought similar evaluations of their own in the weeks prior. Think about what that actually means. The state is telling the court, in writing, that Elizabeth may face more serious charges than the public currently knows about. Her own attorney is telling the same court, in a separate writing, that she may not have been criminally responsible for at least some of what she's already charged with. Those two positions are not just in tension, they are, in a very real sense, the entire unresolved argument of this case, compressed into two competing legal filings, 3.5 weeks apart, both still pending in front of the same judge. Meanwhile, only one of the four defendants has actually made it out of jail. In late July, Gary Siders Sr., 73 years old, dealing with a documented serious medical condition, had his own bond modified to personal recognizance. Archer was candid in public remarks about part of the reasoning. Had Gary Sr. remained in custody, Vinton County itself would have become financially responsible for his medical care, and the prosecutor said plainly that cost was one the county could not absorb without risking real financial strain.
The county was going to be on the hook for his medical care, and again, based on the information that we were provided, his medical care could potentially bankrupt Vinton County. We were not going to put that burden also on our local taxpayers, and so it was agreed that we would do a recognizance bond so he could get the medical treatment that the doctors say he needs, and won't cost the county that money.
A striking admission, in one of Ohio's poorest and least populated counties, that a felony defendant's release turned in part on what keeping him in jail would cost local taxpayers. He was released under GPS monitoring and standard reporting conditions. Gary Siders Jr., Christina Siders, and Elizabeth Siders remain in the Southeastern Ohio Regional Jail, all three still awaiting a ruling on their own bond modification requests. All four now formally awaiting competency findings. And there's a detail in Archer's own memo worth flagging on its own, because it says something about how thin the state believes this family's support network actually is. Where Archer listed 3 separate reasons to keep Elizabeth in custody, his filing on Christina Siders, the mother-in-law, cited only 2, and noticeably did not include any mention of additional pending charges. Read plainly, that suggests prosecutors currently view Elizabeth and, separately, Gary Jr. as the primary subjects of whatever additional charges are coming, with Christina and Gary Sr. treated by comparison as more passive figures in the household, present, but not, in the state's current framing, driving what happened there. That's not confirmed by any statement the prosecutor's office has made directly. It's an inference drawn from the shape of 2 documents filed 3 weeks apart, and it should be read as exactly that, a pattern in the paperwork, not a conclusion the state has stated outright. As of this recording, none of the 4 Siders defendants has been formally indicted. Vinton County convenes a grand jury only roughly once every 6 weeks, far less often than Ohio's larger counties, and prosecutors have not yet presented this case to one. Under Ohio's rules of superintendence, the state generally has 60 days from the point a case is bound over from municipal to common pleas court to secure an indictment, a clock that, by mid-August, had already been running for the better part of that window, which means a grand jury presentation is very likely before the case can legally sit much longer without one. Now step back for a second, because what happened inside that house is not actually where the accountability story ends, it's where the systemic one begins. This family was flagged once before, in October of 2021, when the Gallia County School District filed truancy complaints in juvenile court, naming 6 of the Siders' children individually, each alleged to have missed more than 72 hours of school that year, a threshold that, under Ohio law, is supposed to trigger real court involvement. Court officials went looking to serve the family with those complaints and could not locate them. By January of 2022, the complaints were dismissed for lack of service, and people close to the family have told reporters the Siders left Gallia County around that same window, shortly after County Children's Services began asking questions. They didn't get caught. They got asked one question too many, and they moved into Vinton County, onto a 3-house street, where they stayed effectively invisible for roughly 4 more years. That is not a story about one bad decision. It's a story about a documented paper trail, a school truancy filing, 16 hospital birth records, a public indecency warrant that existed the entire time, in pieces, across at least 2 counties, and never got assembled into a single picture until deputies walked through a door looking for something else entirely. Where this stands right now, all 16 children have been removed and placed in state custody, most in therapeutic foster placements, likely spread across multiple counties given the number involved. Ohio approved roughly $1 million in emergency funding specifically to help Vinton County absorb a child welfare caseload that effectively doubled overnight. The county has stated its intention to seek permanent custody of the children, not a reunification plan, a legal posture that signals the state does not currently believe any of these 4 adults will ever regain custody, regardless of how the criminal case resolves. Gary Siders Sr. remains free on recognizance bond. Gary Siders Jr., Christina Siders, and Elizabeth Siders remain in custody, all with bond modification requests still pending, all 4 now awaiting competency evaluations, and Elizabeth alone facing the added, still unspecified threat of new felony charges the prosecutor has confirmed are coming, but has not yet named. That's where this case actually sits today, not resolved, not simple, and not yet answering the one question that's been sitting underneath it since the first press conference. Elizabeth Siders may be found criminally responsible for 16 counts of child endangering, and possibly more the state hasn't disclosed yet. She may also, under Ohio law, be found not to have been criminally responsible at all, for some or all of it, depending on what a court-ordered evaluation determines about her state of mind during years the record shows she spent almost entirely inside one family's control, starting at 15 years old. Both of those things are currently true, on paper, in the same courthouse, at the same time. That's not an unsatisfying answer because the story isn't finished. It's an unsatisfying answer because the story is finally being told with the complexity it actually has. If you think cases like this one, where the line between offender and victim isn't clean, and where the systems meant to catch a family like this for 18 years kept missing them by counties and jurisdictions, deserve to be followed past the headline, subscribe to The Fatal Truth. We'll be back with the grand jury outcome, the competency findings, and whatever those undisclosed charges turn out to be, because this case is not close to over.